Okay, so today we're going to deep dive into something that I think a lot of people have heard about, at least.
Yeah.
Manifesting your desires.
Yeah.
Tapping into the power of your mind. And I think for a lot of people, maybe when they hear that, they might think of like vision boards or chanting affirmations, all that kind of stuff.
Right.
But we are going to go deeper into the actual science, the neuroscience behind it.
Absolutely.
And how our intentions can become our reality.
Yeah. So we're going to explore two core ideas, I think, that really came out of the source material. One was this idea of how do we shift our mental state from a stressed reactive place, which we're going to call fear mode,
Right.
to a more calm, connected state. And that's what we're going to call heart mode.
I love that.
Yeah. And then the second thing is how do we look at the neurological processes that are involved in taking something that we want and making it more likely to happen?
I love it. Yeah, so to guide us in this deep dive, we've got a couple of pieces of really fascinating material. The first is a YouTube video featuring Dr. Jim Doty, who is a Stanford neurosurgeon.
Neuroscientist.
Yeah. And then some excerpts from Paste in Text, which echo a lot of the same
themes.
Insights.
Yeah.
Yeah, so just to give a little background on Dr. Doty, beyond being a world-renowned neurosurgeon and neuroscientist, he's also a best-selling author.
Right.
And the founder of the Center for Compassion and Altruism Research and Education.
At Stanford.
So he's a pretty amazing guy.
He is.
And his own story is actually pretty incredible.
It is, yeah.
It's marked by a lot of significant challenge early in life and then immense professional success.
Yeah.
And just a really deep commitment to helping others.
And I think, that comes out a lot in what he says. And one thing I thought was really interesting was this encounter he had with a woman in a magic shop.
I know. I love that.
When he was 12. We're going to get to that.
Yes. Yeah. So that kind of brings us to, why are we here today? What is our mission for this deep dive?
Yeah.
And I think it's really to understand, the scientific foundation behind, manifestation, visualization.
Absolutely.
To move past kind of any guesswork.
Woo-woo-woo.
And really uncover practical science-backed techniques that you can use in your life.
Yeah.
We should all be trying to manifest good things. And how do we do that?
Totally.
Okay, so let's start by looking at, the power of what we believe and the stories we tell ourselves.
Yeah.
What we believe is super powerful, right?
Yeah. What's really fascinating here is how easy it is to get caught up in this negative self-talk. And I know we all experience this to some degree, but Dr. Doty describes it as, you're building a prison brick by brick with every negative thought that we have. And, these limiting beliefs create walls that feel really impossible to climb.
Oh, I like that analogy a lot.
It's a good one. But the key takeaway here, this is really important, is that you hold the key to unlock that prison. You have it within you.
That's powerful. Yeah. And that kind of, it leads into, this idea that we're not just passive recipients of our circumstances.
Yeah.
That we do have this ability to create change.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Dr. Doty's life is a great example of that.
It is, yeah.
Growing up with an alcoholic father, a mother facing some really serious health issues.
Yeah.
They were evicted, had to rely on public assistance.
Right.
It's kind of, not a recipe for optimism in a way.
Right.
But it really kind of shows you that, you can really change your reality.
And there's one moment in his story that I just think is so fascinating. It happens when he's 12 years old. He walks into this magic shop.
Yeah.
And he meets this woman who just shows him simple kindness.
Yeah.
Made him feel seen.
Yeah.
And it's such a small thing.
Yeah.
But it had a profound, lasting impact. Fundamentally changed the direction of his life. And it really makes you think about how, being acknowledged and valued can be a catalyst for huge change.
It's true. It's true. It makes you think about, how important it is to just feel heard,
Absolutely.
and how even a brief moment of human connection can really change the trajectory of your life.
Yeah.
And he also touched on how, people who come from these backgrounds often find themselves on one of two paths.
Yeah.
One leading to, substance abuse and mental health challenges.
Yeah.
The other towards, overachieving.
And it's interesting because, those that go down this overachieving path, they often then split as well.
Yeah.
Some achieve success and they don't really look back.
Right.
And others, because they've had these experiences of hardship, they feel this strong pull to alleviate the suffering of others.
Right.
To help other people.
And I think that's so much what Dr. Doty has done. I mean, setting this whole
center at Stanford.
Totally.
Okay, so this leads us into this, fear mode versus heart mode, which was such a big part of.
Came out of a lot of this source material.
Yeah.
And I think, fear mode, as the name suggests, right? It aligns with the sympathetic nervous system.
Right.
So it's your body's automatic fight, flight, or freeze response to stress.
Yeah.
Right? So that's fear mode.
Yeah.
And then, heart mode is connected to your parasympathetic nervous system. It's a state of rest, calm, love, connection.
I love it.
And, understanding these two modes is going to be really important as we get into, the actual neuroscience of how your intentions can become reality.
Okay, so let's get into the neuroscience. Dr. Doty was really clear that what some people call manifestation isn't just some mystical force floating around.
It's not magic.
Yeah, it's really rooted in how our brains are wired and how they function.
Absolutely.
And he defines manifestation in a really practical way. He says, it's the process of embedding an intention into your subconscious mind so effectively that it significantly increases the probability of that intention occurring.
I love it.
So it's really about likelihoods. You're increasing the likelihood that something is going to happen.
Okay.
Now consider this. Every second, your brain is bombarded with an enormous amount of sensory information.
I know.
And Dr. Doty mentioned, I think it was like 6 to 10 million bits of information per second. Your conscious mind can only process a tiny fraction of that.
That's crazy.
Maybe 50 to 100 bits per second.
So like what's happening to all the other, millions of bits?
Well, it's being filtered.
Yeah.
Your brain's deciding what's important and what's not.
Wow. So much happening under the surface. Okay, so how do we then get our conscious intentions to kind of sink down and influence that powerful subconscious?
Well, this is where this fundamental principle in neuroscience comes into play, which is what fires together, wires together.
Okay, yeah, I've heard that.
We heard that. And, this is what explains how habits are formed. It's how neural pathways in your brain get stronger through repetition.
Yeah. Yep.
And so Dr. Doty outlines this really effective technique for embedding your intentions by engaging multiple senses. So think of it as creating a multi-sensory imprint of what you desire.
I love it. Okay, break that down for us. What are the steps involved in that?
So first, you physically write down your intention.
Okay.
So that's engaging tactile sense.
Right.
Then you read it silently to yourself.
Okay.
Then you read it aloud, so you're bringing in the auditory.
Right, so you're hearing it.
And then finally, you visualize it, and this is where you create a vivid mental image of the intention as if it's already happening. Mm-hmm. Right, in detail. And the key here is that you repeat this process.
Okay.
Consistently.
Yeah, so it's not just like a one-time...
No, it's a practice.
It's like you're practicing it.
It is.
I like it. Okay, so by actively involving these senses and repeating the intention,
yes,
we're essentially carving deeper grooves in those neural pathways, making the intention like stronger in our mind.
You got it. And what's really interesting here is that, by doing this, you're activating different cognitive brain networks simultaneously.
Yeah.
And it makes the intention more salient.
Okay.
More important to your subconscious.
So it's like almost, bypassing that filter a little bit.
Yes, exactly.
That massive filter.
Exactly.
Okay, so that leads us to these brain networks that were mentioned. And one of them was the default mode network.
Yeah.
So what is the big takeaway for us about how that works?
Okay, so the default mode network, this is most active when your mind is wandering, when you're daydreaming, when you're engaged in self-referential thought. Essentially, this is where you create and maintain your narrative of who you are.
Oh, interesting.
It's a very powerful network. But it can also work against you because if your internal dialogue is primarily negative, if you're constantly rehashing doubts and criticisms, that negativity gets reinforced within this network.
Yeah, so it's like you're telling yourself a negative story about yourself over and over again.
Exactly.
Oh, okay. So how do we shift that? Because I think a lot of us have that negative self-talk.
Yeah, well, this is where the task positive network comes in. And this network is really crucial for taking focused action.
Okay.
And it has 3 key components: the salience network, the attention network, and the executive control network. Think of them as working together to help you achieve your goals.
All right, let's break that down a little bit. So what's the role of the salience network?
So the salience network is like your brain's internal alarm system.
Okay.
It identifies what's important to you, what deserves your attention.
Right.
So when an intention becomes salient, it flags it as significant, focusing on.
And then the attention network is kind of like once something is flagged, then it kind of zooms in on that.
Exactly. Think of the attention network like a focused spotlight.
Okay.
So once the salience network says, hey, this is important, the attention network directs your cognitive focus specifically towards that intention. Filters out distractions.
Yeah.
Like a bloodhound locking onto a scent.
Following that set. Okay, and then the executive control network is what actually takes over.
It's the action taker.
Yeah.
Right? So this is responsible for the actual planning, the decision-making, the execution needed to pursue your intention. So this is the part of your brain that helps you set goals, strategize, and take the necessary steps to bring that subconscious goal, now made salient and in focus, into reality.
Okay, so it's like a really integrated process. Like the intention becomes important, our focus sharpens on it, and then our brain's like, okay, let's go get it.
That's right. It's really fascinating.
And it's not magic, it's science. It's just good old neuroscience at work.
It's so cool though, right?
Yeah, it is cool. Yeah, okay, so one thing he did say, and I think this is really important, is, you have to kind of manage your expectations.
Yeah, absolutely.
Especially when you're first starting out with this.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like any new habit you're trying to build. Dr. Doty stressed the importance of starting small. You wouldn't expect to run a marathon if you've never run before. You start with a walk around the block,
Right, right.
And so, same principle applies here. Don't try to overhaul your entire life at once.
That's good advice. Yeah, that's really good advice. So one challenge I think a lot of us face is that negative self-talk.
Oh, it's the worst.
Yeah, and it can feel like this constant background noise in our mind.
It's always there.
Yeah, so how do we even begin to reprogram something that's so ingrained?
Well, it's important for you to know that negative self-talk is a very human experience.
Yeah.
And, it's unlikely to vanish completely.
Right.
And even Dr. Doty, someone who's as knowledgeable as he is, he still experiences it. So the key is to become aware of it.
Right.
Understand where it might be coming from and learn not to let it dictate your thoughts and actions.
Okay. So it's more about managing it and not letting it take over than completely eliminating it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And self-compassion plays a big role here, and Dr. Doty talked about this power of positive affirmations, these simple, direct statements like, you are worthy, you are enough. And the reason this is important is often this negative self-talk has its roots in childhood experiences and the stories we've internalized about ourselves over the years.
And he even suggested, maybe taking some time for self-reflection or even considering therapy to understand where those beliefs came from.
Absolutely. I mean, when you understand the why behind the narrative, it can help you to detach from it. He talks about, recognizing your own shadow self.
Yeah.
Right. And so by bringing awareness to this inner voice, you can begin to see it as just one story.
Yeah.
Not necessarily the absolute truth about who you are.
Right, because essentially that negative narrative itself has also been, it's been manifested in a way.
Right.
It's been
reinforced
through repetition.
Repetition, exactly.
So we can do the same thing with
the positive.
Absolutely.
Okay, so this brings us to a really important distinction, which is, want versus need.
Yes.
And this whole idea of service.
Yes.
That was such a big part of both of our sources, too. So Dr. Doty shared a personal experience that I thought was really revealing. He talked about achieving this whole checklist of desires.
Like he had this list.
He had this list when he was 12.
Yeah.
And he achieved it all by the time he was like 37, 38, something like that.
Yeah, crazy.
Yeah, millionaire mansion, successful doctor, Porsche, Rolex. All these things that we're told, like society tells us.
This is what it's about.
Yeah.
This is success. This equals happiness.
Right.
And yet he was so unhappy.
Yeah, and it's so interesting because it really shines a light on this narrative that we have in society where it's like, if you accumulate all this stuff, if you get that one more thing, you'll finally feel fulfilled. But as Dr. Doty shows,
it's not true.
It doesn't work.
It doesn't work. And I think, I think he connected this desire for all the fancy stuff to this deeper need to feel connected.
Totally. It's like this, this need for genuine connection, feeling seen and valued for who you are, not what you own.
Right, right. And I think that's so much it makes so much sense because when we're constantly chasing those external things, that validation from the outside, we're putting ourselves in that fear mode.
Totally. You're activating the sympathetic nervous system, that's that fight, flight, or freeze response.
Yeah.
And that's not a good place to be.
No.
Not chronically, anyway.
And so he was contrasting that to, operating from that love mode.
Yeah, the parasympathetic
nervous system.
Yeah, and it's characterized by feelings of care.
Yeah.
The release of oxytocin, often called the love hormone.
Right.
And it's, activation of the pleasure and reward centers in the brain.
It sounds like a much better place to be.
It feels good. And it's not only good for your well-being,
right,
but it's also the optimal state for clear cognitive function and for setting and achieving these intentions.
Yeah, it's interesting. So, like, the motivation behind what we visualize
matters
a lot, right?
Yeah.
So shifting from, like, I want this fancy car because I want people to look at me,
right,
to I want to be a doctor.
Yeah.
So I can use my skills to help heal people.
It's a different energy. It's a different intention.
It's a total different energy. And I think, he was saying that humans are essentially wired for service.
Yeah, and it comes back to, our evolution. Right. Think about, the survival of the species depended on caring for your offspring, the well-being of your tribe,
Yeah.
And so, this inherent drive to connect and contribute, it triggers the release of oxytocin, makes you feel good.
Right. And it's interesting how, I don't know, maybe this is getting too deep into it, but
let's go there.
Okay. Like how capitalist society sometimes almost pulls us away from that.
It does, because we're constantly being told,
you got to get this.
You got to get this. You got to, compete with other people.
Yeah.
And it's like,
it pulls us out of that connection mode.
Yeah, it pulls us out of our purpose in a way, which is really just to love each other.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's why his story about losing $80 million and going into debt.
It was a turning point.
Was such a turning point for him because it really kind of forced him
into this period of self-reflection.
To look at himself in a different way.
Yeah.
It really, led to this shift towards service and compassion.
Yeah, he ends up giving away, I think it was $30 million worth of stock.
Wow.
Establishes health clinics and supports all these different causes, and it brings him that
fulfillment.
True fulfillment.
That he hadn't felt with all the other...
all the fancy
stuff. So, obviously having your material needs met is important.
Sure, yeah.
But that principle of shifting your beliefs,
right,
your perspective towards service, it really holds true no matter what your circumstances are.
It does. It's a powerful, powerful principle. And it's interesting because he was talking about how even, when things are really challenging, when you feel like you're in a really bad place, new possibilities can emerge when you shift your perspective and interrupt those negative belief systems.
Yeah. He also talked about the bioelectrical energy of the heart.
Yeah.
And suggesting that negativity can have a ripple effect.
Absolutely.
And choosing positivity can be a gift.
And I think this is, obviously we can feel this intuitively.
Yeah.
That, when you're around positive people, you feel good. Yeah. When you're around negative people, you feel drained.
Right.
And there's actually science behind it.
Yeah. Okay, so how can we practically start to shift into heart mode and intentionally work with our mind?
Good question.
To kind of bring about what we desire?
Well, Dr. Doty actually offers some very specific techniques.
Okay.
And you can start using these today.
Let's hear them.
All right. So first, you want to find a quiet and comfortable place where you can relax without being disturbed.
Yeah.
And it's helpful to avoid stimulants like caffeine before doing this.
Okay.
And then practice some slow, controlled breathing exercises. And this is a really direct and effective way to engage your parasympathetic nervous system.
Okay.
And move out of that stress response.
So just taking, those slow, deep breaths, maybe like 4 counts in, hold for 4, exhale slowly for 4.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, wow.
And then take a moment to reflect on the things that you have already brought into your life, acknowledging your own agency. Practicing self-compassion. Understand that, any past failures weren't necessarily entirely your fault.
Right.
And then focus on identifying your true desires.
Okay.
And these are desires that are rooted in a sense of purpose.
Yeah.
In contributing to something larger than yourself.
Yeah.
Rather than seeking external validation.
Yeah. And not getting too attached to how things will unfold.
Absolutely. Manifestation is not about rigid control.
Right.
Or demanding that the universe deliver exactly what you've pictured.
Right.
On your specific timeline. It's okay if things manifest in unexpected ways.
Yeah.
Or at a different pace than you anticipated. Patience and trust in the process is key here.
And remembering, your brain responds powerfully to imagination.
Oh, yeah. And that's what he kept saying. It's like, focus on the feeling
Yeah.
of already having achieved the desire.
Yeah. And by embedding those intentions, through the writing, the speaking, visualizing, we're making them more salient to the subconscious.
Yeah.
You got it.
And then we start noticing more of those opportunities.
Think of it as priming your brain to notice things that you might have overlooked before.
I like that.
Yeah, like synchronicities, coincidences.
Yeah.
Suddenly you're seeing all these things that are pointing you in the direction of your goals.
So it's almost like by being more intentional about those things, it's like you're, I don't know, like
opening up possibilities.
Yeah, opening up possibilities. You're opening up your brain to recognize the possibilities that are already there.
I love it.
Okay, so Dr. Doty also shared a little bit about his own daily routine, which I think is a really good example of how to integrate this into our lives.
Absolutely.
So mornings, he starts with the slow, controlled breathing to activate the parasympathetic nervous system.
Yeah.
And then just takes a few moments to appreciate the joy and awe of being alive.
It's so simple, but so powerful.
Yeah, like gratitude practice.
Yeah.
Okay, what about his evenings? So in the evening, he focuses on his top priorities or intentions, usually his top 3.
Okay.
He takes the time to write them down, repeats them silently to himself, then reads them aloud, and then spends time vividly visualizing them as if they're already happening.
Yeah.
And so, he really emphasizes this, this practice of, mindful intention setting. It becomes a habit.
Yeah.
And it's a mindset that you develop over time.
And he really emphasized that authenticity piece, really being present in the moment.
Yeah, accepting yourself fully, just as you are, not dwelling in the past, not worrying about a future that hasn't happened yet.
Right.
And he believes that, our primary purpose is connection with others, not isolated individual achievement. And so cultivating this daily practice of presence, self-acceptance, gratitude, love, it forms the foundation for intentionally shaping your reality.
So to bring it all together, for you, the listener, the big takeaway is you have this power to influence the direction of your life.
Absolutely.
By understanding and working with the neuroscience of your mind. It's about consciously choosing to shift away from that stress-induced fear mode.
Right.
And cultivate a more open, receptive, connected heart mode.
Of it.
And then intentionally planting those seeds of desire through these consistent
and multisensory
practices.
Powerful.
Yeah. And as Dr. Doty said, this ability to manifest isn't about waiting for some external force to intervene.
Yeah.
It's about you recognizing and harnessing your own power.
Yeah, you're not powerless.
You're not powerless.
You have agency.
And he left us with that really profound thought. You are the universe.
Which is just, it's amazing.
Which is mind-blowing. It makes you think about how much potential
we have within us.
Yeah, we have within us. And his final words were a call to action.
Yeah.
Make an effort to help at least one person.
Every day.
Every single day.
And it doesn't have to be a big thing.
No.
It can be something small.
Yeah.
But this simple act shifts your focus outward.
Yeah.
Opens you up to possibilities and aligns you with that heart mode.
Yeah.
So you're creating this positive feedback loop.
It all comes back around.
It does.
Okay, so to you, the listener, take some time to really consider those prisons of negative self-talk.
Absolutely.
That might be holding you back. Recognize that you possess the key.
You do.
To unlock them.
Yeah.
And by understanding this science that we've explored today and applying these practical evidence-based techniques, you truly hold the power to create a more fulfilling and meaningful life.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And remember, the journey begins with that first conscious breath.
Yeah.
That first act of self-compassion.
Yeah.
And that first intention set with an open and hopeful heart.
I love it.
There you go.
That's all for this deep dive.